Let's break down every single remaining NBA playoff team's chances at winning the championship. Starting right now with the team that I have ranked at 8th, the Golden State Warriors. Now, it genuinely pains me to put them this low, but the reasoning here has very little to do with their actual on-court performances, and unfortunately, it has everything to do with the injury to Steph Curry. Without Steph, Golden State's offense doesn't just dip, it practically collapses. Outside of Nikola Jokic, I'm not sure there's another player in this league who completely defines their team's offensive identity the way that Steph does for this Warriors team. He went down in Game 1 with the hamstring injury, and while initial reports suggested he'd be out for at least a week, we've heard that kind of timeline before, especially when it comes to soft tissue injuries. A week often turns into 2 or even a month. And the thing with hamstrings is you cannot rush back from them, because if you try and come back too early, it isn't even just risky. You're pretty much guaranteed to re-injure it. That's why personally, I don't think we're going to see Steph back in this series. And if that is the case, I don't see a path forward for Golden State. Maybe they can steal one game from Minnesota to at least give them a chance in Game 6 where Steph could potentially make a return, but after losing Game 3, it just doesn't look like they have enough firepower to go any further. So unfortunately, with all of that in mind, Golden State falls to 8th on my list. At number 7, I've got the Indiana Pacers. Now I know what you might be thinking. They're currently up 3-1 against Cleveland, so why are they ranked so low? But hear me out. Even though the Pacers have looked very good on the scoreboard, I still don't fully trust this team as currently constructed. One of their biggest red flags for me is their complete lack of rim protection, which becomes a massive deal in the playoffs when every possession counts, and every defensive breakdown is magnified. In Game 3, when the Cavaliers were finally healthy and attacking the rim with a purpose, the Pacers defense simply had no answer. They looked completely overwhelmed whenever Cleveland drove to the basket, especially Donovan Mitchell. And it wasn't just the interior defense either. They got completely worked on the boards, giving up far too many second chance opportunities. And this isn't a one-off problem either. It's been a reoccurring issue for the whole season. Rebounding and stopping second chance looks are two of the many soft spots Indiana does have, and they get much harder to hide the deeper you go into the playoffs. And when I look at their chances at winning the championship, I just don't see how it's supposed to happen, especially without a true superstar to carry them when the going gets tough. Tyrese Halliburton has been incredible in the clutch, and for that, I'll give him all the credit in the world. But let's be honest, in the coming rounds, as we head towards the NBA Finals, a big shot here and there simply isn't going to be enough, as he needs to produce as a much better scorer over the course of a full 48 minutes. And maybe I sound like a bit of a hater here, and if I do, and you disagree, feel free to let me know in the comments below. But I'm just calling it how I see it. This Pacers team feels like they're playing at their absolute limit right now, as they've taken full advantage of a banged up Bucks team and a Cavaliers team that hasn't been full healthy until Game 3. They haven't truly been tested yet, and I think that test is here. If Cleveland can stay healthy over the course of the rest of the series, don't be surprised if Indiana gets a real dose of reality. That's why, even with the series at 2-1, I've still got them as the 7th most likely team to win the title. In at number 6, I have the New York Knicks. And to be honest, I felt this way before they even had dropped Game 3 to Boston. The biggest issue in my eyes is that the team is still far too reliant on Jalen Brunson. He's had really strong moments, no doubt, but when everything is flowing through one guy, especially in the postseason, that kind of one-dimensional play tends to get exposed. They've tried to get others involved, but because that hasn't been their consistent approach all season long, it really hasn't clicked. Guys like Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, and Miles McBride have all been brought in to try and help elevate this group with scoring, and they simply haven't been consistent enough when they're called upon. And that is not their fault. It's tough to suddenly become a focal point of offensively in high leverage situations, especially when you really haven't had that role all season long. That being said, there are still a few things I like about this Knicks team. In the playoffs, they've started to show flashes of what people expected from them all season. Bridges and OG have really stepped it up defensively, and that's helped to bring some much needed balance to the team. I've also been a big fan of what Tibbs has been doing with the bench rotations. He's utilizing a defensive unit when they really need stops, subbing out Brunson and Towns for guys like Deuce McBride and Mitchell Robinson. And he's also played with some interesting lineups, even throwing out Robinson and Towns together, trying to impose their will with size and the interior presence. You can tell that he is pulling all the levers he can. Still, as much as I like that effort, I can't shake the feeling that the first two games of this Boston series told us a lot more about the Celtics than it did the Knicks. Almost everything that went wrong for Boston was self-inflicted. Missed shots, poor execution, and a general lack of urgency. And even with all of that going wrong for them, New York still found themselves down 20 points in both games. That says a lot. When the Celtics finally locked in for Game 3, you could see the gap that truly exists between these two teams. I simply don't trust New York to hang with a top-tier contender when things tighten up. That being said, if they're able to keep games close, they always have a shot to come out on top, because there might not be a player in the league more comfortable in the clutch right now than Jalen Brunson. The guy lives for the big moments. He wants the ball, and he delivers more often than not. His Clutch Player of the Year award wasn't just deserved. It felt inevitable, but even with him leading in that way, I can't justify putting New York ahead of any of these teams that I'm about to mention. At number 5, I've got the Minnesota Timberwolves. And while yes, part of the reason they rank this high is definitely due to the Steph Curry hamstring injury weakening their current opponent, but that is far from the whole story. The Wolves have quietly been a juggernaut, especially over the back half of the season. They have really figured things out on both ends, showing the kind of two-way dominance you need to make a playoff run. Now, their offense has taken a noticeable dip in the playoffs, and let's be honest, we all knew that that was going to happen. That's the one area still holding them back from being viewed as no doubt title contenders. But even with their offensive stumbles, their defense is just so elite that it always gives them a chance to win games, regardless on who they're playing. They've definitely had trouble generating consistent offense against this Golden State defense, which since acquiring Jimmy Butler has absolutely been suffocating. Game 1 was rough. They shot just 17% from deep as a team, and the entire offensive flow looked disjointed. That made Game 2 feel like a real turning point. They bounced back with a huge improvement, shooting 43% from deep, and it wasn't just the numbers. It was the confidence and energy that came with those shots falling. When Minnesota's knocking down their threes to complement that lockdown defense, they become incredibly difficult to deal with. Now with Steph Curry confirmed to be out until at least Game 6, if he comes back at all, you have to like Minnesota's chances of closing this thing out. They handled their business in Game 3 once again, pulling out a 6-point gritty win. Anthony Edwards, who struggled through the first 2 games, finally looked like the superstar version once again. He put up 36 points on 46% shooting, really setting the tone. Julius Randle also stepped up in a major way, putting together a 24-point, 10-rebound, 12-assist triple-double with 3 steals to boot. That kind of all-around impact is exactly what the Timberwolves need from him. And while the final score might make it seem like the game was a lot closer than it should have been, when you consider how good the Warriors defense has been, especially without Steph, it starts to make a lot more sense. Losing Curry, who's probably the weakest defender on the team, has ironically allowed Golden State to put out 5 strong defenders on the floor at all times. Add to that, Butler and Kuminga combined for 63 points, as suddenly it wasn't so surprising that this ended up being a grinded out win. What Minnesota really needs from Anthony Edwards is to keep leveling up. He had a really tough outing in Game 1, and part of that came down to the lack of decision making, constantly forcing tough shots instead of playing with more patience and control 4 like he did in round 1 against the Lakers. When he gets into that shot-chucking mode, this team tends to stall. But when he slows it down, picks his spots, makes really good drive and kick passes, it makes Minnesota look so dangerous. If Edwards can keep that mindset, stay smart with his shot selection, and continue to build off of what we saw in Game 3, then Minnesota is in a really good spot. Coming in at number 4, I've got the Cleveland Cavaliers. Even though they're currently down 2-1 in their series against Indiana. Depending on when you're watching this, Game 4 may have already occurred. But based on what I saw in Game 3, when Cleveland finally got all their key players back in the lineup, I'm still very confident that they have the potential to make it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals. It's night and day when the group's healthy. You reintroduce the second best player on the team with Darius Garland, the newly crowned Defensive Player of the Year winner with Evan Mobley, and the veteran scorer they traded for at the deadline with DeAndre Hunter, and suddenly the team looks sharper, tougher, and far more complete than they did in that Game 2 loss. The funny thing is, even in that Game 2 loss, where none of these three played, Cleveland still had a real shot to win and should have. They were right there, and if they executed just one more solid possession, they easily could be up 2-1 right now. But really, I think Cleveland is just better. Once Darius Garland returned, even though he was still clearly hobbled and managed just 10 points on 27% shooting, his presence alone completely reshaped how Indiana has to defend this team. Garland is the second best shooter on the team, and having him out there forced Indiana to stretch out their defense even further, having to really close out to him on the perimeter. That opened up more swing opportunities for open three-point looks that they simply weren't able to generate as much without him. With him back, the offense has started to reassemble, getting back to the smooth flowing offensive system we come to know in the regular season. But where Cleveland really separated themselves was on the defensive end, especially with the return of Evan Mobley. He looked like the Defensive Player of the Year right from the jump, filling the stat sheet with 18 points, 13 rebounds, 4 assists, and a combined 6 steals and blocks, even knocking down a 3 in the process. His versatility and presence completely changed how the Pacers had to approach attacking the paint. And with Jarrett Allen adding 19, 12, and a couple of blocks, this was the vision Cleveland had when they committed to the double big lineup. Every time the Pacers drove inside, they were met with size and force. Shots were contested, rerouted, or straight up erased. Still, what might have been the biggest edge for the Cavs in Game 3 wasn't even the rim protection. It was the rebounding. Cleveland completely dominated the glass, winning the battle 56-37, including a staggering 18 offensive rebounds that led to 31 second chance points. That's an outrageous stat. And when you zoom out and look at the total shots, it becomes even more obvious. Cleveland got up 100 field goal attempts compared to Indiana's 80. 20 more shots than your opponent in a playoff game. That is almost always going to lead to a win. Combine that kind of volume with elite defense and better offensive execution thanks to Garland's return, and you've got a recipe for what was, once again, a truly great Cleveland Cavaliers team. Of course, there's still the looming question hanging over all of this. Can they stay healthy? Garland's toe injury is no joke. By the end of Game 3, he looked visibly limited, and it raises real concerns about how effective or even available he can be from Game 4 looking onwards. Brian Windhorst also reported that initially there was doubt that Garland would return in the series at all, and yet he was back on the court under 48 hours later. That speaks to his toughness, but it also makes it hard to imagine that he's going to be available for every game in the rest of this series. That is a huge variable for this team offensively, because without him, their spacing is a lot worse, and it's a lot more Donovan Mitchell hero ball. But even with that concern, what's keeping this team so high in my rankings, beyond the dominant rebounding and elite defense, is the superstar level play we've seen out of Donovan Mitchell. He's been nothing short of spectacular. Over the first 3 games of this series, he's averaging over 40 points a game, something that only 2 other players have done in the last 40 years, Michael Jordan and LeBron James. That is incredible company for Donovan Mitchell right now. So despite the adversity, despite despite being down in the series and despite the injury concerns, there's just so much working in Cleveland's favor, and that is why I still have them as a real chance to win it all here at 4. In at number 3, I've got the Oklahoma City Thunder, even though they currently trail Denver 2-1. After letting Game 1 slip through their fingers and seeing Denver protect their home court in Game 3, OKC suddenly finds themselves in a bit of a hole. But despite the current deficit, Game 2 looked like a perfect snapshot of just how dangerous this team can be, especially when they're really locked in. When they're forcing stops, turning defense into offense, and then getting out in transition, they're an absolute nightmare to deal with. That game was a reminder of why so many people were starting to whisper about a deep playoff run for this group. It wasn't just how well they shot the ball, though they did knock down 44% from deep. It was the way they overwhelmed the Nuggets with their pace. The Thunder also decisively won the turnover battle, forcing 20 Nuggets turnovers and turning them into 34 points, while dominating the offensive glass for 20 second chance points. Add in 6 more rebounds than Denver overall, and the result was a game where Oklahoma City just buried them under an avalanche of extra possessions and fast break opportunities. Those are the kinds of performances that set the Thunder apart. Unlike a team that relies solely on hot shooting nights or heavy isolation heroics, Oklahoma City is at their best when the whole team is humming defensively, when they're flying around on a string, rotating perfectly, denying space, and jumping into passing lanes. They create a rhythm that feeds directly into their offense. There's an energy to this team in those moments that just feels unstoppable. But as good as they've looked at times, the biggest question mark about them heading into the playoffs is starting to show. Clutch time. In games 1 and 3, Denver pulled this young Thunder team into a late game high pressure situation, and that is where Oklahoma City has really struggled. All season long, because they were just blowing teams out every night, they rarely found themselves in these crunch time battles. And now that they're going up against a former champion, we're seeing the consequences of a true lack of experience. Throughout most of the game, their offense flows just fine. SGA and Jalen Williams initiate as they're able to get Hartenstein floaters, open threes for the outside shooters, and good looks for themselves as things just move smoothly. But when the game tightens up, that's when it becomes clear just how young this team is. In Game 3, for example, the broadcast kept reminding us about how efficient Hartenstein has been with his floaters, shooting something like 82% on them. But that stat means a whole lot less when it's overtime in a must-win playoff game on the road with everything on the line. They kept trying to manufacture the same shots that they would generate earlier in a game, but with the pressure dialed all the way up, those looks simply weren't falling. I think Isaiah Hartenstein took about 3 floaters in the overtime period, and he even airballed one of them. Because in those moments, that is when the ball needs to be in a superstar's hands. And you need those superstars to be creating real advantages, not just trading isolation baskets. Unfortunately, in that moment, it became the SGA show. Forced ISOs, tough contested shots, and Denver was more than ready for him to do it. They sent help, walled him off, and made him work incredibly difficult for every single shot, as they held him completely scoreless in the overtime. This is the kind of situation where being too dominant in the regular season can actually come back and bite you, because the Thunder weren't in many close games. They never really got a chance to build those late game reps or figure out how they're going to consistently execute when every possession matters the most. Now they're learning on the fly in the middle of a playoff war against a team that knows exactly how to close games. And so far for Oklahoma City, playing Denver has been a massive wake-up call. That said, this is not a collapse, it's a test. This team is incredibly young, and this experience, even if it comes with growing pains, is going to be crucial for their development. Jalen Williams, for one, looked fantastic in Game 3, even in a loss. He played with confidence, poise, and made big plays all throughout the game. But now, the Thunder will need to take the next step. They've got to learn how to close. They need to find ways to get clean looks for their stars in the clutch, not just hoping they can create something out of nothing. If they can do that, their ceiling is still incredibly high. They've already looked like world beaters once this postseason, but now they're up against a proven champion, and for the first time, they are starting to look look like the young team we all knew they were. At number 2, I've got the Boston Celtics. Now, going down 0-2 to the New York Knicks was definitely not part of their playoff plan. And on the surface, it looked like the Knicks had completely disrupted what Boston wanted to do offensively. A lot of people were giving New York credit for forcing the Celtics into tough shots and playing this gritty, disruptive brand of defense. And to an extent, it was somewhat true. But if we're being honest, I believe that 99% of the reason why Boston lost the first 2 games of the series had nothing to do with what the Knicks were doing. It was basically solely self-inflicted wounds. New York, for all the praise that they've received, were actually playing pretty rough basketball in those first 2 games as well. Their offense was incredibly clunky, they weren't executing particularly well, and yet it felt like they were handed a 2-0 lead. That only happened because Boston could not buy a bucket from deep. In Game 3, we saw exactly what this Celtics team is supposed to look like. They walked into Madison Square Garden and finally shot the ball like we know they can, hitting 50% from beyond the arc, drilling 20 out of their 40 3-point attempts. That is obviously a hot night even by their standards, but it really just highlighted the gap between what happened in the first 2 games and what this team is actually capable of on any given night. If they had shot even close to their regular season average of 37% from deep over games 1 and 2, we'd likely be talking about a very different series. The Celtics just have too many advantages not to be punished by poor shooting. They create open looks consistently, they move the ball, they space the floor, and when those threes start falling, it's lights out for just about anybody given how good they are defensively. Because the 3-point shooting isn't even what makes them so dangerous. It's because they have the complete package. They've got playoff experience, they have 2-way stars, and they've got the versatility to beat you in multiple ways. My biggest criticism for the team has always been the same. When the threes aren't falling, they sometimes look like they've got no backup plan. That issue reared its ugly head early in the series, and it's something they still haven't fully addressed. But the thing is, you've got to trust the numbers. Is it really likely that this team, one of the best 3-point shooting squads in the NBA, is going to keep shooting below 25% from deep for 4 games out of a 7-game series? For me, I just don't see it. And obviously, they don't either, as they continued to lean into their 3-point shot, and it worked in Game 3. Still, what's been encouraging is that Boston has actually started to shift their approach just a little. During the regular season, they were jacking up close to 50 threes a game, and in Game 1 of the series, they went wild for 60 attempts. But in Games 2 and 3, they dialed that back to just 40 in both games, and instead looked to get some more shots around the rim and inside the arc. That change has helped them find a better balance, and it's made them more difficult to guard because it's not just about shooting over the top anymore. They've actually started to apply some pressure going downhill. That's going to be important moving forward, especially over the course of a long playoff run when they're likely to have another rough shooting night again. Of course, Jason Tatum needs to be better. There's no way around it. He hasn't been the MVP level force we've come to expect, and if Boston wants to go back to back, they need him to get back to that level sooner rather than later. Even when he's having an off night, the Celtics still have the depth and the experience to carry the load. With guys like Jaylen Brown, Derek White, Drew Holiday, Kristaps Porzingis, and Peyton Pritchard all contributing in different ways, this team isn't going to fold because one guy's having a bad shooting night. They've been here before, they felt the pressure, and truly, they are built to withstand it. That's why, despite the early series hiccup, I've still got Boston as the second most likely team to win the title. They're too talented, too well coached, and too experienced to let a cold shooting streak completely define their championship run. Now, in at number 1, and I still can't believe I'm saying this, but I do have the Denver Nuggets. Honestly, I did not see this coming. Heading into the All-Star break, I still thought that Denver did have the potential to be the best team in the league again, especially if they could tighten up their defense like they did back in the 2023 championship run. But that just never happened. Instead, their defense continued to slip, and their rating on that end continued to drop, as it eventually led to the firing of head coach Michael Malone, a move that at the time felt like the final nail in the coffin. I'll admit it, I pretty much wrote them off right then and there. But since that point, something shifted. The team has completely responded to the chaos, and now they're back, looking like a completely locked-in championship caliber squad. They're back to playing that hard-nosed connected defense, and more than anything else, they are showing the mental toughness and refusal to quit that define them in the championship run. Denver just has this incredible resilience to them. There's stretches where they look borderline unstoppable on both ends, and their victories in Game 1 and 3 against Oklahoma City were perfect examples of that. Those were games where they just kept fighting, weathering the storm, allowing them to take over late with some clutch time brilliance. I actually waited until Game 3 was over before committing to Denver at the top of the list because I genuinely needed to know if Game 2, when the Thunder ran riot, was a sign of something real or if it was just a flash in the pan. But then Denver comes out in Game 3 and once again looks like the championship level squad, pulling off a gutsy overtime win. Even in that game, where it genuinely felt like Nikola Jokic and Russell Westbrook had switched places in the first half, because this was hands down one of the worst Nikola Jokic games I've ever seen. Even then, the Denver Nuggets still found the way to win. They dug deep in overtime, and Jamal Murray was just sensational. He was everywhere, putting up 27 points, 4 rebounds, 8 assists, 4 steals, and a block while shooting 48% from the floor. Aaron Gordon and Michael Porter Jr. stepped up to help shoulder some of the offensive load that Jokic didn't provide, combining for 43 points. And that's the thing, despite not having the deepest bench in the league, the Nuggets might have the most cohesive and dangerous 5-man units in basketball. They seem completely unflappable in the clutch, and meanwhile, Oklahoma City truly looked like a young team getting pulled into the deep water, because Denver stayed composed, tightened up defensively, and executed late like they've been doing this for years, because they have, while the Thunder were completely floundering in the moment. Another thing I've quietly noticed, especially since the coaching change, is how Denver appears to be staggering Jokic and Murray's minutes far more effectively. I don't have any hard numbers in front of me, but just by watching the games, it feels like the non-Jokic minutes haven't been quite as bad. In fact, early in Game 3, the minutes without Jokic were actually a +5 swing in the favor of the Nuggets, which is massive and not something we ever would have predicted last year. That kind of lineup flexibility makes them even more dangerous, which is why I have the Nuggets as my favorite to win it all. Now, coming into this playoff run, I thought the Boston Celtics were going to be my clear favorites, but when they fell down in that 2-0 hole to the New York Knicks, it really uncovered a lot of questions surrounding about just how dominant they actually are. And if you're wondering how this happened and whether or not the Boston Celtics fooled the NBA for years, you can check out this full breakdown right now.